You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with the Financial Times Whitehall editor, Sebastian Payne, and the journalist and author, Rachel Shabi. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. The Financial Times leads with the protests in Shanghai as police struggle to disperse large crowds in a growing wave of discontent at China's zero-COVID policies. Protesters calling for President Xi Jinping to resign is on the front of the Daily Telegraph. That's also the main story in the Metro, with the headline, "The Great Brawl of China." An image of the protests is on the Times front page, but it leads with plans to bring in army personnel to help with walkouts as strike action looms. The Eye claims Rishi Sunak is facing mounting pressure as he tries to relaunch his premiership this week. The Guardian says Brexit has worsened the NHS's shortage of doctors, leading to more than 4,000 European doctors choosing not to work in the UK. Labour was accused of trying to price families out of private school, according to the Daily Mail, by planning to scrap their charitable status. The Express claims the government has a radical new plan to boost the NHS, inspired by cutting down on bureaucracy. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code that you'll see on screen during the programme, it's there now, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Sebastian Payne and Rachel Shabi. Welcome to both of you. Let's start with the Financial Times and the situation in China, the protests at the increased zero tolerance regarding COVID and the lockdowns that they are still suffering there. Rachel, take us into this.
Yeah, this is a really surprising wave of protests that we're seeing in China. Now it's in its second day, and obviously you've been reporting on that throughout the day. This is unprecedented, this sort of scale of protests in China. It's about the lockdown, it's about the COVID restrictions, which are now in their third year. And the thing about them is that they're not just restricted to one city. They're spreading across the country. They're reported to be in some 50 universities in Wuhan as well as Shanghai, and people openly calling for the president of the Communist Party to stand down. This is just, short weeks after he was elected. That's Xi Jinping into his third term of office. But this is just an eruption against the zero COVID policy in the country, particularly jarring against the sort of carnival atmosphere that people are seeing on their screens around the World Cup, where nobody's wearing any masks, nobody's social distancing, and it just looks like China has had enough.
Yes, they're complaining about the lack of freedom and what they say is the unscientific nature of the COVID policy. And it does seem as though they really have had it enough, Sebastian, and they're protesting openly in unprecedented scenes.
Very much so. And obviously, this is a very dangerous thing for people to be doing within China. And as you see on the front page of the FT, the protests are holding up a blank sheet of white paper because that's the only thing they can do without getting almost certain arrest. And this is obviously something we've seen in other authoritarian countries and regimes. As Rachel just said, the World Cup seems to have been a big trigger for this. And we've seen that Chinese state TV has actually edited footage to make sure there aren't too many scenes of the crowds there, because of course you can see the crowds and there are thousands of spectators not wearing masks in the way that China has become used to. And I think this has seeped into the general consciousness of what the rest of the world has realized, which is that a zero COVID policy is not one that is ever going to work or is ever achievable. And to try and maintain it is taking increasingly authoritarian aims and ultimately is going to be unsustainable. And the main protests we've seen are in Beijing and Shanghai. The Financial capital, and the general scene suggests that there really is this big uprising. Some are calling on Xi Jinping to resign as president. That obviously feels unlikely. And if you think back to Tiananmen Square, and this has been likened to the biggest protest since that 1989 moment when the tanks rolled in, it will probably be met with quite a lot of brute force from the Chinese state, particularly if this continues to spread. And this has been bubbling away for quite some weeks and months. So it's a pretty volatile situation, but it's an amazing thing to see. And the question is, does China try and hold its position on zero COVID, or does it try and water it down in some way to try and appease some of the concerns? Because that would be the easiest way out of this for the Chinese state. Of course, the best and most natural and right way is to transition to the kind of COVID policy the rest of the world has, where you are living with the virus, you are vaccinated, you accept some transmission, but you're not doing the kind of rapid lockdowns, constant PCR testing that you're seeing across China right now.
Yes, and there are coronavirus outbreaks in many of the large cities, including Guangzhou and Beijing, as you said, but previous outbreaks have been successfully suppressed. But the state media outlets are saying that the government will continue to put people and lives first and would not waver from its approach. So no sense that the government will change their policy, their zero-tolerance policy on COVID. The Metro, their headline, The Great Brawl of China. They're saying, as you suggested, that these are the biggest protests since the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre, Rachel.
Well, yeah, and the difference between these and Tiananmen Square is obviously the impact of social media, despite the restrictions in China, but also that these protests are widespread. They're not just in one place or one region. But it is interesting that you mention rightly that there are no signs that there's going to be a shift from the zero COVID policy. One of the problems that China has, the main problem, is its vaccination rate is not all that great, particularly for the elderly. There's only 66% of the over 80-year-olds who have full vaccination, and some 40%, around 40%, who've had a booster. So there's that, but also there's just the reality that their own vaccine is just not as good as vaccines that are made outside of China, which are more reliant on the mRNA structure for the vaccine. But I don't think that Xi Jinping is going to essentially lose face over the country and say, yeah, we need to import foreign vaccines because they're better. So it is a bit of a bind with that. And that is why they're so reliant on these zero COVID strategies, which are very extreme and which, of course, the rest of the world has, moved away from and has done for some time.
Sebastian, to The Guardian, and we read that Brexit is costing us European doctors, 4,000 fewer European doctors working in the NHS directly because of Brexit.
Yes, this story does kind of what it says on the tin there, that it looks at vacancies within the NHS and says, yes, there's these huge extra gaps. And I think the Guardian is reporting over almost 11,000 physicians are needed within the NHS at the moment. And the paper is citing research from the Nuffield Trust, a very well-respected healthcare think tank, that says extra red tape and bureaucracy are leading to many EU doctors who come to the UK to train in medicine, going back to EU countries afterwards. And of course, these are the kind of barriers that were going to be brought up following the decision to leave the EU in 2016. And it's the kind of obvious thing where we've got vacancies within the jobs market. Why is the government doing something about it? That, we've talked for quite a long time about the need to add targeted visas for particular parts of the economy. And the NHS is one that clearly needs it. And there's a story on one of the other papers, I think it's the Times, saying that the army is going to be drafted in to try and help move ambulances and medicines and supplies around over the winter months. I mean, if you've got a clear problem with the bureaucracy and the red tape of Brexit involved here, That should be liberalised, as opposed to getting army trucks and tanks going around the country. And of course, all this is going to be exacerbated by the continued levels of strikes, particularly the nurses, of course, who are going on strike over the pay dispute. So it's going to be a very tough winter for the NHS. This is the first winter where COVID has not dominated for 3 years, but you've got the strikes, you've got the vacancies, so it's a pretty unhappy picture.
Yes, also ballot action on 15,000 ambulance workers due this week as well. Just time for the Metro, and who's coming back to reality, Rachel?
Matt Hancock, he's out. And he's going to come back to the UK just in time for the next round of the COVID inquiry, I think, which seems appropriate given that he bears so much of the responsibility of what went wrong, the excess deaths, the failure to protect the vulnerable, the hiving off millions of pounds to buy dodgy PPE and paying dodgy test and trace companies that weren't up to the job. So, yeah, about time he came back and actually faced some real scrutiny, I think.
Sebastian, do you think he's rehabilitated himself in the final 3 in I'm Celebrity? Is it a surprise he stayed in so long?
I am very surprised. I was one of the many people bemoaning in a hand-wringing sense what a dreadful idea this was for MPs, for democracy, for the Conservative Party. But Matt Hancock went into the jungle with a very clear aim, and I'm afraid to say it's been relatively successful. He went in to develop his reputation beyond politics to try and gain some sympathy, become more of a celebrity. And that certainly happened. If you look on the comments of various websites or on Facebook or on other social media, Matt Hancock has certainly gone a long way to try and make people feel more sympathetic towards him. He didn't win, which obviously something he would very much wanted to do, but I think coming third when he went in so unpopular, so disliked by the other campmates within the jungle, he'll see that as probably a clear victory. And the fact it's on several of the front pages tomorrow speaks to what he was trying to aim. I'd imagine he will come back. I'd also imagine he'll probably stand down from Parliament at the next general election and will be focusing on an Ed Balls, Edwina Currie and Widdicombe-style-esque post-parliamentary career instead of dealing with the COVID inquiry, of course, which is the most pressing thing right now. But yeah, the whole thing is just utterly bizarre.
Yes. Sebastian and Rachel, for the moment, thank you. We are going to take a break, but coming up, fury over Starmer class war on private schools. That's according to the Daily Mail. Welcome back. You're watching the press preview. Still with me, Financial Times Whitehall editor Sebastian Payne and the journalist and author Rachel Shabi. Let us have a look at the Telegraph. And this is some advice that we are being given to turn boilers down to 60 degrees. This is going to be part of a two-pronged strategy spearheaded by Grant Shapps, the business secretary. But we were previously told that it would be nanny state if the government did advise us on energy-saving measures. There's been a change of mind. Sebastian.
Yes, I mean, I thought it was always ridiculous that the government wasn't going to give basic advice during an energy crisis. And we're learning that this information scheme is going to start tomorrow. £18 million being spent to tell people how to basically save energy. And of course, the idea is the cumulative effect of this across millions of households will help save the government billions in the longer term in terms of their energy support package. And one of the things is to turn your boiler down to 60 degrees, though I imagine many households have just not had that boiler on full stop. So I don't think they'll be listening to that. To turn radiators off in rooms that you don't use, keep windows closed. I mean, a lot of it is basic common sense, but it's very good to be reminded of it by the government to keep in people's memories that this is an energy crisis. We do all need to try and do our bit. And I think most people I know have put on an extra jumper, not put the heating on until they've absolutely had to. But I think we wasted so much time under the Liz Truss government where essentially she refused to do anything as part of her kind of, anti-nanny state drive. But to me, it just felt really silly because you've got to try and do something because at the moment, the energy support package is costing the government hundreds of billions of pounds. That's so much money, and anything they can do to reduce that is essential.
But apparently this campaign is not about telling people to wear an extra jumper. That's completely the wrong idea. That's not where they're heading. Let's have a look at the Mail, Rachel, and this story about Labour's plan, well, their war against private schools, prizing parents out of that market.
I mean, it's a very typical sort of Daily Mail headline, isn't it? A sort of ramped up hysterical reaction to something that is just trying to level the playing field and equalise opportunity in the UK.
But it would mean parents paying more. Parents with children in private schools will be paying 20% more on their fees under this plan from Sir Keir Starmer.
The people waging war in this country at the moment in the education sphere are private schools. Private schools are the ones that are waging class war. There's only 77% of the population is educated in private school, and yet they dominate all positions of power across politics, across media, across law. That clearly has to stop. That's clearly not a fair system in the UK. And what Labour is proposing is purely trying to address and rectify that.
Isn't it just about making people pay more, though, Sebastian?
I mean, I'm not really a fan of this proposal. I just don't think it's like the main focus or argument Labour should be having at the moment. It's kind of a classic retreat into class warfare as opposed to focus on the much more substantive issues that we've still got this economic fiscal black hole, which Labour hasn't put any explanation forward of how exactly it wants to fill it. Obviously, the Daily Mail is doing the kind of thing the Daily Mail does and be pretty tub-thumping right-wing about these things. But fundamentally, I just think that this is not really a priority right now. And if parents want to send their kids to private school, then they should be allowed to do that. And I just think, as you said, it is ultimately going to result in parents paying more. And of course, don't forget, parents who send their kids to private school are essentially paying double because they're funding state schools through their normal taxation and then paying extra on top of that. I don't think removing charitable status is a good idea. And many private schools reinvest back into the state sector as well through free schools, sponsoring academies, through scholarships.
We must leave it there. We will continue this in the next hour. Sebastian, Rachel, for the moment, thank you.